I'm a 21-year-old male, and this experience happened last summer. I was on vacation with my family at Myrtle Beach, South Carolina. We were staying in a resort right on the shore. One night, I was restless, and I was having a hard time falling asleep. It was around 3 a.m., and I decided to go out onto the balcony to get some air. I stepped out and was stunned that there was a full moon. The moonlight reflecting on the water was quite stunning. The beach was completely empty as far as I could see. I had never seen it like that before. So I decided that since I wasn't able to sleep, I might as well head down and take a stroll. Maybe listen to some music and relax. Hopefully when I returned, I would be able to get some sleep. It was kind of dumb of me. Since it was 3 a.m. and the rest of my family was sleeping, I decided to just head down without letting anyone know. I thought I would be no longer than 10 to 15 minutes before I came right back up. So at the base of the resort was an area with a pool and an outdoor bar. There were 2 boardwalks separated by about 100 feet, which both led to the beach. On the sides of the boardwalks were patches of tall grass separating the ocean and the resort. When I got down to the base, the entire area was completely deserted, and I began walking down the boardwalk on the right, toward the beach. As I'm walking, I suddenly see someone approaching me from the beach, which was strange, because I had a pretty clear view of this area from my balcony, and I saw nobody there before. I start to get a bit nervous as I see the figure approaching. As he drew closer, I got a better look at him as the boardwalk was sort of illuminated by the lights from the outdoor bar. It was a guy who was maybe in his late 30s. He was wearing glasses with these large, square lenses. He looked like he was on edge and alert, almost like he was trying to find someone who he was meeting in this area. His clothes were somewhat tattered. We made eye contact and I sort of nodded at him as I passed. At this point, I'm creeped out, because honestly, this guy was giving me Jeffrey Dahmer vibes. Maybe it was the glasses. He just didn't seem like the kind of guy who belonged in that resort. I shake it off and kept walking down towards the beach and put in my headphones. As I get down to the beach, I turn right and begin walking parallel to the water, and I'm just taking in the scenery. It was just nice to walk along the shoreline. I move closer to the water and continue walking. It was no longer than a minute into this walk that I get a really strange feeling that something is wrong. I take out my headphones and turn around, and I see a dark figure that is trailing just up the shore. He is situated between me and the resort. I immediately tell from the figure's height, body type, and demeanor that it was the same man I had passed on the boardwalk. At this point, I'm beginning to panic. At the same time, I'm trying to rationalize, as it feels too surreal that I may actually be in a dangerous situation. So I reminded myself that it could just be a coincidence, and the man decided he also wanted to take a walk on the beach, and just happened to be heading in the same direction as I. So I took some deep breaths, turned back to the ocean, and continued walking in the same direction. After a couple of seconds, I turn my head again, and I see that now he is much closer than he was before. And he is not walking parallel to me. He was definitely walking towards me. I pick up my speed and turn my head back around and see that he is matching my pace and is still coming toward me. Still, for some reason I thought, okay, so maybe he also wants to walk by the water. There's no way I'm actually being followed by a creepy man on a deserted beach. To truly test it, I completely change directions, and as I turn my head, I see him completely change directions with me and continue closing the distance, and he is power walking now. It suddenly hits me that I'm in a really bad situation. I take off in a sprint along the water, and he begins running as well, but stays slightly upshore so that if I try to run towards the boardwalk, he will intercept me. I'm freaking out now, and I just keep running with no plan. But I figure since I'm 20 and sort of fit, if I kept running straight, I should outrun him and find some other way off the beach and either call my family or head back to the resort on the road. So I keep running, with him trailing behind me. This goes on for what feels like 10 to 15 minutes. The scariest part of all of this, which I wouldn't have thought of, is it is completely dead silent. All I hear is my own breath and my feet on the sand. And when I turn, I only see his shadowy figure keeping pace with me. Suddenly up ahead in the sand, I see a small blue light with what looks like 4 people on the beach with a blanket. I make a bet to myself that even though these people are upshore, I can still make it there before he catches up to me. So I start sprinting towards them, with the hopes of quickly telling them what was going on so we could all confront him. I really use up my energy sprinting towards them. As I approach, my heart drops. What I see is 4 guys on a blanket with 3 or 4 bottles of hard liquor surrounding them. 3 of the bottles are empty, and the 4th is about half empty. 3 of the guys are just completely passed out on the blanket, with the 4th half sat up, obviously beyond shit-faced, with a sort of party hat on that has blue lights on it. He seemed to be talking to himself. His eyes were half closed, and he didn't even register me approaching him, even though I'm now no more than 5 feet away. I turn and see the figure has slowed down and is observing me. It seemed that I had underestimated his fitness, and since I had just sprinted towards this group, I was exhausted myself, and I was afraid he might actually be able to catch up to me if he had just continued running along the beach. And then, who knows what. So instead of turning around and running, I suddenly sprint toward him and to the right, which I don't think he was expecting at all. I catch him off balance and run right past him. I'm in a full sprint back toward the resort. Literally all the hairs on the back of my neck were standing. It felt like one of those nightmares where you're barely evading someone, but they're about to catch you. The adrenaline was crazy. But I just kept running, and then the resort came back into view. I finally looked back to see how close he is, and saw that he was maybe 400 or 500 feet away. He had lost a lot of distance on me. I ran back up the boardwalk and toward the base of the resort. I jammed the elevator buttons and leapt inside, then start mashing the closed door button as I'm gasping for air. When the elevator got to my floor, I literally sprinted back towards my room. I opened the door, entered, and then slammed it shut behind me, double locking it. I am completely out of breath, and I dropped to the floor and just lay there for a minute, not believing what just happened. Let's just say I definitely wasn't able to sleep after that. This happened a few years ago when I was on vacation in China with my family. We had just met with some of my extended family over dinner at a pretty nice restaurant. We had some excellent food and good company. After we finished dinner, my family can be sitting at a table for hours, just talking about random stuff. Since my mom has not been around her siblings for some time, she and her sister were babbling about what has happened over the years. One odd thing that came up was the horror stories about the abductions in China, chloroform attacks, sex trafficking, etc. However, my mom and her siblings always like to exaggerate things and gossip, so I just passed it off as nothing but rumors. Growing up in the West, my younger siblings and I aren't very good at speaking Chinese, so we were pretty bored the entire time. My younger brother broke out his 3DS to play some games. My older brother, who is a lot more fluent than the rest of us, was in on the conversation. My younger sister was the baby of the family and was only about 6 or 7 at this time. The restaurant was freezing. They had the AC cranked to max. The huge change in temperature was getting to me. My sister, who had no one to play with, was also getting restless. I told my parents that I was going to step out, and she wanted to tag along. I went downstairs and left the restaurant. It was nice out, there was a good breeze, and my little sister was just running around and just enjoyed being outside. However, I noticed something very strange. Beijing is a very old city, and there is a mix of modern city streets, but alleyways that are still very much old China. The restaurant backed into one of these alleys. I noticed there was a shady-looking man on the corner. Something else that I found odd is that there were other shady-looking men walking into this alley, and the first man would give him a nod of approval before they went in. They would nod back at him. I really can't explain it, but everything was off about him. He moved erratically, darting his head around, and his expression never seemed to change. I was busy thinking about what could be going on back there, when suddenly I heard my sister screaming. I had taken my eyes off of her for a second, and she was grabbed by a man who was now trying to drag her toward the alley. My big brother instincts took over, and I sprung into action. Now, I'm not a big guy by any stretch, but I did train in martial arts, and I could see that the assailant wasn't in the best shape. I punched him in the face as hard as I could, and he immediately let go of my sister and held his bloodied chin. He then darted back into the alley without another word. He didn't even grunt in pain. My sister and I rushed back into the restaurant. She was okay, albeit scared out of her mind and crying. Her wrist was red with the man's handprint. He must have really wanted to take her. This all happened so fast, and I was still processing it. I was surprised at just how sudden it was. There was no stalking, no chemicals, drugs, or chloroform, just straight out physical abduction. Hearing all the stories of human trafficking, sex slavery, and organ trade in China, I shudder at the thought of what could have happened. Growing up every year, in late July, early August, my family would get together and camp for about 2 weeks at White Lake State Park in Tamworth, New Hampshire. Some of my best childhood memories were made there. Rollerblading, Nerf gun wars, flashlight tag, water balloon fights with my cousins, etc. I was in my late teens when my family stopped getting together to camp out after my grandmother passed away. One of the last times I was there, this one particular memory has stuck with me. Just over 10 years ago, I was 16. It was around 10 p.m. when I noticed that I had a missed call on my cheap little track phone. My family was sitting around the campfire cooking s'mores and making small talk, so I decided to go off for some privacy and return the phone call. I took a long, narrow trail that stretches between other campsites and leads up to the public bathrooms. I wasn't going there to use the bathroom. I just wanted to find an empty picnic table to sit at. There were plenty of those, since this whole side of the campground was completely vacant. There were no other campers nearby. It was quiet and dark. So instead of going towards the bathrooms, I chose a campsite and sat down at a table. The lights from the distant bathrooms on top of the hill were illuminating my surroundings just a bit. I called my friend and was carrying on a conversation for about 20 minutes. As I'm sitting there, staring straight ahead, I see a silhouette coming down the path in front of me. The figure was heading in my direction, where all these empty campsites are. It wasn't that unusual to see people strolling through the campgrounds for a night walk. However, these people usually have flashlights on. Whoever this was did not. I wasn't creeped out at this point. I was just watching out of curiosity. As the person got closer, I got a better look at their outline. It was a man. I noticed that his pace was slowing down. I kept my eyes fixated on him as I continued conversing over the phone. A minute or two passes, and now He has stopped moving and is just standing there in the path, looking straight into the campsite where I'm at. I don't know if he knew that I could see him. He was staring daggers at me, and I was staring right back at him. He was heavy-set and tall. I could also make out that he was wearing a jacket. I couldn't see much of his facial features, but I guess he would be in his 30s or 40s. Now alarm bells were going off in my head. My mind had turned to mush at this point. I was frozen, no longer listening to what my friend was telling me on the phone. I was in a stare-off with this guy. Then, he began to move again, tiptoeing toward me, very carefully. He didn't want to make any noise. He put one foot in front of the other. It looked like he was about to charge toward me. In that moment, I snapped out of my frozen state. I leapt off the picnic table and began running through the campsite back toward the trail. I could hear him thumping behind me, leaves scuffling, heavy yet fast footsteps, getting louder and closer. I made it back to that narrow trail. Once he got close to where I was, I heard the sound of twigs snapping and a grunt. I can imagine that perhaps he tripped, or maybe got face-slapped by a tree branch. Most likely he wasn't familiar with this trail like I was. Whatever the reason was, it caused him to stop chasing after me. I didn't stop to look back. I just kept running and running and running until I made it back to my family's campsite. When I got back, they were still making small talk and laughing and smiling by the campfire. I broke down crying and was trembling. I explained to them what had just happened. My aunt then spoke up and said, "Oh geez, he probably thought he knew you and was coming up to give you a good scare as a joke." My cousin chimed in and said, "Yeah, he probably stopped running after he realized that he didn't actually know you. Probably feels real dumb now." They all chuckled about it and changed the subject. I think I was dismissed because nobody wanted the good vibes of the night to be ruined. And the fact that I'm just a socially anxious person in general, I'm very cautious and shy. For the time being, I allowed them to convince me that I was just overreacting. But here I am, many years later, looking back and shaking my head over this. I wish I was taken more seriously, but other than that one thing, it was still a great trip. It was time well spent with my family. This experience makes me think twice about going for a walk anywhere by myself. Hey everyone, this is your Uncle Unit. Thank you so much for checking out my video. If you have a story that you would like me to narrate on this channel, please send it to my email, unit522submit@gmail.com. Make sure you hit the subscribe button so you don't miss out on any future content. And if you would like to support this channel even further, you can check out my merch store. There's a link for that in the description. I look forward to hearing from you, and I hope you stay tuned for the next video. Until then, never forget.